we have finally reached the very interesting point where finishing a 20 target pack in Mythic Plus and looking at the damage meter, now it's no longer that important to see who was at the top of the meters. I'm sure it will make a few players happy, it will give them some dopamine boost to see themselves topping the charts with 26 million DPS. However, nowadays what is more relevant is the kind of damage you did. It is very common to prefer specs that might be 10, even 15% lower in damage than the top damage dealer if their damage is right, if their damage is of the correct kind. The correct kind we are talking about is prio damage, funnel damage, damage to the big guy in the group. This is relevant to talk about today because in previous expansions this was always something that was valued already in Mythic Plus. If you go back to pretty much the entirety of Dragonflight, Shadow Priest was one of the mainstay meta DPS, and one of the things they did bring to the group, besides their utility, which was considered what made them very good back then, like Mind Soothe and even Mass Dispel, even PI. However, prio damage, the funnel that they had, was the very powerful part. Now, this expansion, in the first 2 seasons, we still had our prio damage mainstay pick for the meta comp. In season 1, you had enhancement, being the meta character with funnel, and in season 2 you had Arcane, right? However, what is different this season is that so far the 2 meta specs in the main comp in Mythic Plus are Arcane and Havoc, next to Frost Decay. Now, while Frost Decay does turbo, mindless, Zug AOE DPS, Havoc and Arcane do extremely good funnel damage. So now we bumped up from having a single spec that does funnel to having 2 specs that do funnel, and sometimes you even get to see 3 specs in the same comp doing funnel damage. But let's bring up our examples. This could be your run-of-the-mill Mythic Plus pack. To put a face to these bars, imagine this, right? You are in Halls of Atonement, you have one of the shards of Alkias, and then you have the collectors, the obliterators, and a bunch of small groundkeepers. Pretty common type of pull. You have plenty of these kind of pulls where you have one big guy and a bunch of smallies. You have the Sentinel from Ecodome, you have the Starseer spawning the AoE sphere in Gambit, you have the big Scarab guy in Arakara, you have the Light Spawns in Priory, you have the Sparkmaster Electricity guy in Floodgate, you also have the super annoying Blood AoE dot guy in Floodgate, you have pretty much all of the mini-bosses in Dawnbreaker, the very nice Torrenting Ray double dot channel guy as well in Dawnbreaker. So all of these guys would be the main big HP guy you want to take out early on in the group. But there is a problem, right? The problem is they are the most dangerous, yet if you do AoE, if you do blanket AoE damage, if you hit things like Divine Storm, if you hit things like Breath of Sindragosa, if you hit things like Earthquake or Chain Lightning, you're just hitting everyone, you're just lowering the HP of everyone at the same time. This is not very good because this guy's got the most HP. So if you keep doing this, if you have multiple specs that keep doing this, you will end up like this. The smallies will die immediately. Pretty much as soon as you pop your CDs, you have like a Frost Decay, a Marksmanship Hunter, a Devastation Evoker. Those guys are dead in 5 seconds. The one-shot threat guys, so the casters, the ones you want to cycle your interrupts, right, are about to die, but then the chunky HP guy is still at like half HP. So now you're sitting for 20 seconds single targeting this guy. This loses a lot of your time in the key, because even if you are the strongest ever single target spec, in single target you might be doing 6 million DPS, but in AoE you will still be doing more damage. It's AoE, you are hitting more enemies, you're still, even if you are the weakest AoE spec and the strongest single target spec at the same time, you're still going to be doing more AoE damage. So sitting still hitting this guy for 20 seconds because you killed all the others so fast is not very good. Now, you could be saying, well, I have a solution for this. I am just going to drag this half HP guy into the next pack. Simple, solved. We're just gonna AoE him down in the next pool. Well, there is a problem. The next pool is another one of these. The next pool is another one of the ones where you want to focus the big guy. So now you have the big guy and an half HP big guy you didn't kill from the pack prior. On top of that, these two big guys are these scarabs. So what are you gonna do? Pull the half HP guy so he starts his AoE swarm at the same time as the new scarab casts his AoE swarm? Are you gonna drag this spark master guy from the second to last pool in Floodgate into the double spark master pool of the last pack before the boss in Floodgate? So now you have 3 of them casting the sparks on the ground. That's kinda dangerous. The best solution would obviously be to be able to kill them all at the same time. To be able to have someone whose DPS curve looks more like this. So he might have less DPS than the other guy who is just AoEing everyone at the same level, but can get significantly more damage on this big HP guy. I want to give you an example immediately. You see, we have now a +20 Gambit, a +19 Gambit, and another +20 Gambit. This is the first pool, so very large pool with a bunch of Murlocs and the Goliath. So the mega HP guy who also does quite a lot of damage to the group with his stomps. Now you can see one group is doing 16 million DPS to the Goliath. It takes them over a minute to get rid of the Goliath. The second group is also doing 16 million DPS to the Goliath, and it takes them about a minute to get rid of the Goliath. The third group takes 27 seconds to get rid of the Goliath and has 40 million DPS on the Goliath. Now, the first group in question has 0 specs that can funnel. The second group in question also has 0 specs that can funnel, or it could have sub, but not in this scenario. And the third group has triple funnel spec. All 3 of them can funnel. It takes them less than half the time of the other 2 groups without funnel specs to get rid of the big HP guy. And we also have the perfect example we just showed with this one right here. Their damage drops so incredibly low because with the Goliath, you can see the overall damage of this pull. It drops so low because they are stuck for 20 seconds, pretty much just hitting the Goliath. What they're doing here is basically there's just the Goliath left. So they're basically just single targeting the guy. Because of course they turbo DPS'd all of the Murlocs. They had their nice AOE DPS on the rest of the Murlocs, they all died super quickly, and then the Goliath was just left alone. Meanwhile, this group, thanks to things that they can do, can get a lot of damage on the primary target. So that for them, the situation would look more like this. If you can funnel damage on the main target and heavily increase the damage you can do on that guy, the HP of your enemies in the pool will look more like this after a while, which is much better, of course. Now, not all specs, of course, are created equal. So Havoc is one of the primary elite funnel damage dealers because they have Wounded Quarry. Whenever they proc a Reaver's Glaive and they can put a Reaver's Mark on their primary target, they also get to funnel 20% of the physical damage they do to all other enemies to also be done on their primary target. So you end up in situations like these. Now, don't ask yourself questions due to some chaos damage conversion trickery. It's actually more than 20% of only your physical damage that ends up being funneled in Wounded Quarry. But you can see Halls of Atonement, you look at the first pack with Shard of Alkias, you check the damage done to the Shard, and it's Wounded Quarry. That is what allows them to have such good prio damage. Now, the luck of Havoc is that even in this pack, let's say, or let's just say even just the first Shard damage, they can still do pretty decent AoE damage without that. But it's of course much different compared to a classic turbo AoE spec, the very same spec that was meta last season for this very reason. When you look at the damage overall balance looks great. Even when you look at the overall damage at the end of the key, balance will be first. And then you look at who actually helped shaving down the HP of this mob so you can finish the pack faster, because you're not stuck for 20 seconds doing single target on this dude. Wasn't balance. Balance was chilling in the back. It was the Demon Hunter and the Arcane Mage, even if when you look at the end of the damage meter, at the end of the key, balance will be there. And Arcane is another member of the gang of the very good prio damage. So Arcane has Aether Attunement. Every 3 clear casting you get to essentially AOE Arcane Missiles. Thanks to this multi-target Arcane Missiles, you pretty much stack all the time. With just one cast of Arcane Missile, you can stack Arcane Harmony, which gives you 100% more damage on your next Arcane Barrage. And then you have Resonance, the most important one. Arcane Barrage deals 12% increased damage per target it hits beyond the first. You hit 1 extra target per Arcane Charge, so 4 Arcane Charges, 48% more Arcane Barrage damage. This is one of the reasons why, for example, it is very common to pull 2, 3, 4 mobs, whatever you can nearby, next to a boss when you have an Arcane in your group. Because that way, the Arcane can just keep benefiting from 48% more Arcane Barrage damage on the boss, because he is hitting more targets with Arcane Barrage. That is what gives them very, very good funnel, as long as you have more targets to hit with Arcane Barrage. Arcane Barrage, of course, does less damage to the other targets. It does 40% of the original damage, so your main target will always take way more damage. You can look at this example on a Shard of Alkias, the damage of Arcane Barrage. You can see Arcane Barrage always has its main target and then the 4 extra targets. On the first one, it's a 10 million hit on the Shard of Alkias, and only 3.6 and 3.4 on the Collector and the Dark Blade. The second one is a 14 million hit, and then 4.5, 2.1, 4.5, 2 million on the other targets. 17 million, and then 1.9, 5.6, it's much smaller. But the damage on the main target is significantly increased by the fact that you can hit other targets with Arcane Barrage, giving you extra damage on your primary target, which is what gives Arcane very good funnel damage. The perfect example would be this group right here. The Arcane in this group didn't have a good time, wasn't performing very well. He was gapped even more than usual than an Arcane Mage should be gapped. Now look at the first pull of Floodgate. So of course you have the Shreddinator, right, as the big guy. Now Arcane here is like legitimately griefing, okay? He's like borderline doing tank damage. Yeah, we know Prot Warrior does some pretty good damage, but come on, this is still very, very low, even by Arcane standards. You look of course at mobs like the many contractors in the pool, all of these 2 guys, what are they doing? Frostbite, Glacial Advance, the explosion of Reaper's Mark, Remorseless Winter, Tempest, Earthquake, Chain Lightning, Lightning Rod. So it's all blanket AoE. They're just hitting everyone, they're not really targeting anyone in particular. Then you look at the big guy. In our example, the Shreddinator is the big chunky HP you want to shave. Even in a pool where this mage was possibly drunk or was trying to let his brother, his little brother play, even then it's still out damaging the Frost Decay. And then the Elemental Shaman, I don't even think he's targeting the mob anyways, compared to their overall damage in the pool, with how much higher they are compared to Arcane. Even then Arcane is still passing them in the single target prio damage on the Shreddinator. So obviously when you go and look at pools where the Arcane Mage actually has ends, you see that here Balanced Druid, sure, is topping the meter. You check the Shard of Alkias, who did damage to the Shard of Alkias, it's the Arcane and the Havoc Demon Hunter. Except that unlike that mage before, their overall damage is still good, it's still competitive, more than enough, even if Balanced Druid is gapping them by 2 million, so we're talking about basically doing like nearly 20% more damage than them. Even if balance is doing 20% more damage, their damage is still more valuable. Is what allows balance to have better AoE, because you shave the big guy's HP the most, you funnel damage on the big guy, you have less damage on the smallies and on the other medium HP mobs, which means balance gets to hit them for more, gets to keep up his AoE for more, because the mobs are not dying nearly as fast, while at the same time the Arcane and the Havoc are making the key faster, because you won't be stuck single target hitting this Shard of Alkias for 20 seconds because you incinerated all of the small guys super quickly, and then you were just left with this big chunky HP guy alone and you had to hit him for like 20 seconds by itself. The third one in our list of very good funnel would be Assassination. They have basically the same thing Havoc has, except instead of being 20% of the physical damage done to all of the other targets being funneled to their marked targets, for Assassination it's 5% of all of your damage being funneled to your marked target with singular focus. So back into our very good pool where the Goliath only lasted for 26 seconds, where all 3 specs did super high damage, you had the Havoc, which did so with Wounded Quarry, you had the Arcane, which did so with their empowered Arcane barrages, and then you had Assassination do so with singular focus and their single target cooldown, but mostly with singular focus. Now the issue with Assassination comes more to the fact that while they have super good single target in those windows, when they actually have to like purely single target is where they are much weaker. You know, it's not that uncommon to see Assassination in single target to be quite a bit lower than the other specs, or even much lower than the other specs, which is what is dragging them behind a bit more from being competitive, because while their funnel is matching Arcane and Havoc, first of all, their utility, their toolkit is not perhaps as good as the other specs, and then also their pure single target is not nearly as good. And even if you do the mini cheese of pulling 2-3 mobs with the boss, so you have some funnel, Assassination needs a few more targets than that. Arcane is perfect with just 4 extra mobs, that's fine for them. Assassination would want even more, which is very often way too dangerous for some of the bosses. So that is what is limiting Assassination way more. Now, these specs might be meta. Havoc and Arcane certainly are. Assassination is decent, it's a decent niche pick. There are other specs that in the past have been, as we mentioned, things like Enhancement, things like Shadow Priest with their dot style, very similar to Assassination. Assassination gets more energy if they dot enemies, if they bleed enemies. Shadow gets more insanity, so the result is very similar. They get to dump more Devouring Plague, they get to spawn more apparitions on the main target, right? So they do also have very good funnel. But obviously it's not that you just need good funnel to be a meta spec. It's just one of the things that you have to be good at, and it's nowadays very important. It's just to make players realize that having turbo mega AoE and finishing first in the meters very often doesn't really mean much. It definitely means enough in low level keys, that's fine, but if you're wondering about why X spec isn't considered as good as this other spec when they are doing 15% more damage than them, it might be because the damage they are doing is not actually good. It's actually bad damage, because as we said, very often you want to keep the mobs. Even though you are doing AoE and your goal is to kill these mobs, you kind of want to kill them slowly enough that you can funnel off of them as you gain more damage on the big guy, creating a situation like this. You keep gaining resources, whether it's energy, insanity, arcane charges, maelstrom, whatever, if you're hitting more targets or simply more damage on the main guy. So the more they stay alive, the more damage you can do to the main guy. If you have too many turbo AoE specs, so if you don't have specs that can funnel, you create a situation like this, where you have done too much AoE. Your AoE was too high, so too many mobs died too quickly. which means that now specs that could funnel well on the main guy are now gaining less damage on him. They are doing less damage to him, so you will be stuck having to deal with this big HP guy now for longer. This is why funnel is so important in shaving time in keys, because doing less AoE damage will save you time in Mythic Plus. Might sound like a counterintuitive thing, but it is. If you do less AoE damage, you let mobs live longer, which allows funnel specs to funnel on the main guy for longer, which allows you to then kill the much bigger HP guy at around the same time as all of the others. So the specs that can do very good AoE will do AoE for a shorter period, instead of the pool lasting for 50 seconds because it was 30 seconds of AoE and 20 seconds of single target on the remaining big guy that was still alive. Now the pool is 35 seconds long, but just of pure AoE, which will net you more time, 15 seconds shorter than if you just did turbo AoE. If you drag a Balance Druid, a Frost DK, and a Marksmanship Hunter all in the same group, they will destroy all of the small guys and will be left with the big guy at half HP. If you use the Balance Druid with a Havoc Demon Hunter and an Arcane Mage, the pool will be shorter. Even if at the end of the pool you see the Arcane Mage having 1 million less DPS and the Havoc 1.5 million less than the Marksmanship would have, or the Frost DK would have, if you put Frost DK and Marksmanship and Balance Druid together in the same group, their damage would go much lower down, because they want to do the same thing, which is very high AoE damage on all targets. So eventually they will kill the small guys, their AoE will get smaller and smaller, and then they will get dragged into a longer pool, only hitting 1 or 2 mobs for like 15 seconds, which of course tanks your DPS. This is why I thought it was a relevant video to make, because nowadays, as you can see, all of the top groups right now are running a double funnel comp, so they're not more worried about having massive AoE specs. They are content with just one, which is Frost DK, and then they're thinking about a more precise kind of damage profile. And because it has gotten so important, this is the video where we explain exactly what funnel is, how does it work, and why is it so good in Mythic Plus in pretty much saving you time in your keys. So sorry to have you come to school on a Sunday, but the lesson was relatively short. So for today, we are now done with this lesson, informing everyone on this very important kind of damage profile for Mythic Plus. I'm going to let you leave to the rest of your weekend afternoon on this Sunday. So, thanks of course everyone for watching, including everyone who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, it is pretty fitting that on this day, September the 21st, the beginning of autumn, is also supposedly the last day of high temperatures. I'm fine with it.